Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Joey from Lock Props. Today, I'm going to be showing you how I made the Keyblade from the Kingdom Hearts series. This is going to be a step-by-step process on how I got a PVC pipe and EVA foam to look like this. Now, I'm not heartless. I went ahead and put affiliate links down below of the tools and materials I used to build this. And I also included a free, simple and clean blueprint to get you started. I love the world of Kingdom Hearts. What better way to show my love than to create the iconic weapon from the series? Let's get started.
I first start by printing and cutting out the template. I bought a 1 1/4 inch PVC pipe and lined up the front and the back of the Keyblade and marked the end with a Sharpie. I took my PVC cutter and cut it down to size. Next, I wanted to round the front of the key, so I took the corners of the pipe off with the belt sander. This can also be done with a Dremel or sandpaper. Speaking of sandpaper, I grabbed 400 grit and smoothed out the areas where the belt sander was a little uneven. I wanted to cover the whole of the pipe, so I got a 5mm piece of EVA foam and heated the foam to the point where I can make an indent of the inner circle of the pipe. Once I made the indent, I cut it out using the X-Acto blade. Then I used super glue to stick it into place. I wanted to build up the end so it's a round dome, but I used acrylic putty and that wasn't such a good idea. Alright, so I thought maybe the acrylic putty would work for me, but sadly it doesn't. It's going to take a lot of layers in order to get it to the volume that I want, especially since the very end of it is rounded off. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using that, I'm going to switch over to the foam clay and just apply a bunch of that on, and then we're going to smooth it out afterwards. In case if this doesn't work, I'm going to try out Warble after this. When I was using the clay, I had to knead the clay for a bit to keep its form. Then I pressed it to the end of the pipe, slowly rounding out the piece and taking off the excess. I wanted to smooth out the clay, so I got some water on my finger and began working it into the clay. This will eventually smooth everything out once it's dry. You can take some high grit sandpaper and smooth it out. I used 400 and 1200 grit and didn't go too fast, otherwise the clay breaks off in chunks. Next, I wanted to build up the handle. I started with the front part. I measured from the 3 round trim pieces to the back, not including the round piece where the handle begins. I marked off that section with a Sharpie and began to put barge cement onto the pipe. I cut out a 2 1/4 strip of 5mm EVA foam and put 2 coats of contact cement on it. Once dried, I began wrapping the pipe with the foam. Once I had it 95% wrapped, I cut where the foam will meet the other side. I put some more super glue at the end and sealed it. I sanded down the seam with my Dremel and then applied a thin layer of foam clay and water to clean the seam. Next, I want to add the round trim to the handle. I wrapped the dowel around the area where it will sit and cut it to length. I then cut the dowel in half using my razor. Luckily, we need 2 sides, so I glued the inside of the dowels and the area where the dowels will be glued down to. I overlapped the end and make a cut with my razor, then I added some glue to the end, then repeated the same process with the other trim right next to it. When the glue was ready, I put them into place. For this front trim, we are going to repeat the same steps we just did with the dowels. Wrap them around the pipe, cut them in half, mark where they go, glue both sides in the main pipe, wrap them around again, cut them down to size, and glue them into place. Then we have to do the area between the first 2 trim dowels and the last 2. So I grabbed the foam clay and began to shape the detail, making sure that the bottom half had more material. I smoothed the clay out with some water, and once it was dry, I did light sanding with the 400 grit sandpaper. Once sanded, I make a small dowel out of clay. Since I already used the smallest size I had, I made this one thinner than the others. I applied some water to the base as sort of a glue for the clay and followed along the outside of the pipe. I needed to make the grip next before building up all the layers on the outside of the handle. I want the handle to be seamless, so I measured the handle plus the top and bottom trim. I measured the length of the grip to about 6 inches in length and 6 inches around. Then I got Yaya Han's hex fabric from Joann's and cut out a 7.5 by 7.5 inch piece of fabric. I need it to be longer than the foam piece I will be using, which would be a 6x6 inch piece of 2mm EVA foam. Then I will use the Loctite spray adhesive to spray one side of the foam and the back side of the fabric, and then I'll put them together. Now with the extra length, I'll cut off the corners in a square shape, then I'll take it back outside and spray the back side. Then I'll fold the extra length inward to make the ends look clean. Now I'm marking the bottom of the foam so I can contact cement within that area, and also put the contact cement on the back of the foam. After they're semi-dry, I wrap the foam around the pipe, being sure to really pull and stretch it when I'm wrapping it around to make the seam not have such a big gap. Now for the front trim of the grip. I grabbed about a 1/2 inch or 14 to 15mm foam dowel and cut it in half, then wrapped around the handle and cut the length of the pipe and then glued it into place. Now we can work on the back piece. I measured 2¼ inch as far as width goes, and then diameter of the circle is going to be a little bit more than 3 inches. I got a 2-inch PVC pipe, then I cut out a 2¼ inch piece. Then I'm going to cut out a strip of 5mm 2¼ inch piece of foam. Then wrapped it around the pipe and made sure I had enough material. I glued the pipe and the foam and made the mark where the cutoff should be and then glued it down. I took the pipe to the sander to make sure it fit the main PVC pipe. You can also use your Dremel for this if you don't have this tool. For the end, I found a 3-inch PVC cap, but it was uneven, so I measured the thickness of the cap wall, which was about 4mm, and the width and the length of the area which I need to build up, which was 3/4 inch by 8 inches. I glued the strip and the section with barge and pieced them together. I cut off the excess foam and sanded it down. I then made a test fit and it looks like it's perfect. The cap has this detail from the manufacturer and I sanded it down to make it smooth. Now for the back of the handle. I take some EVA foam clay and put it on my 2½ inch circle template and start building up the shape into a semi-cone. I applied some water to smooth it out. Then I used a cookie cutter roughly around the size of the main pipe and cut out the middle. The areas that cracked from the cookie cutter we can smooth out later with more water. Making a test fit and it seems like it's still good. Next we will take some PVC glue and coat the inside of the cap and glue it onto the second piece. After taking a look at the template, we do need to make it just a bit thicker, so I measured around the PVC pipe to get 9 inches and the width is 2½ inches. I used my 4mm EVA foam and made a strip with those dimensions. I glued both pieces with a contact cement and wrapped it around. I need to put the end cap and the base trim together, so I glued both pieces and stacked them on top of each other. I used more foam clay to clean up the seams in the area where the cookie cutter damaged the trim. Last part for this section is the end trim. I measure about 3.21 inches for the diameter and then use my 5mm EVA foam to create a circle with those dimensions. I cut out the circle and used my Dremel tool to sand down the sides and used contact cement on the end cap and the back of the circle and pieced them together. Then I used the PVC glue to cover the bottom of the main pipe. Then I slid the back part into place and it's looking good so far. The next part of the project that I wanted to tackle was the key teeth. I cut out the template and measured the diameter of the pipe, which is about 1.5 inches. Then I got 1.5 inch foam piece and traced the key teeth on the foam, and then I cut it out. Then I took it to my scroll saw and began cutting it out. With all these curves, I felt like that this was the only way to get the shape. I used the head of the Sharpie marker to trace around the edges of the top of the teeth. From some of the reference photos that I saw, the top of the teeth is actually tapered down. So then I took it to my belt sander and smoothed it down until I couldn't see any more of the Sharpie on the inside. I wanted it to sit flush with the pipe, so I took it to my spindle sander and sanded it down into a U shape. If you don't have this, you can just use the Dremel. I took some sanding sticks and went around the areas that had sharp edges from the scroll saw, and then I took my Dremel and sanded down the very corners of the teeth into a bevel. I used some foam clay to fill the areas where I went too far with the scroll saw. Now to put this on the pipe. I grabbed some barge cement and did 2 coats of it on the foam and the pipe, and making sure to line up when I'm placing it down. Then I use EVA foam clay to fill the gaps in between the pipes and the foam, and then use water to smooth it out. Then I sanded it down with 600 grit sandpaper. Before I move on to the handles, I want to make these small domes. So I got half-shaped Christmas ornaments and filled them with EVA foam clay, and made a half dome and set them aside to dry. Now I can cut the handle part off the template. I went to the back same 1.5 inch piece of foam I used before for the teeth and traced the handles on that. I then cut them out with my scroll saw and then used my Dremel to sand down the sides. Then used a 600 grit sandpaper to smooth it down even more. Then I took my template and cut up the hole where the dome is going to go. I traced it using a Sharpie and then grabbed my half domes and cut off the excess. I go back to the handle and use my X-Acto blade to trace around the circle, but I'm just scoring the surface just a little bit. Then I use my heat gun to make the lines pop up. I took a sanding stone bit to my Dremel and slowly began sanding away the material. I also softened the edges of the circles too. Then I took the half domes and glued them into place using super glue. Then I went back to the sanding drum on my Dremel and sanded down the edges just to make it a slight bevel. Like the teeth, I wanted the handles to shape to the pipe, so then I took my Dremel and began sanding down the inside into a U shape. Then I used contact cement to glue the handles to the main pipe. And just like before, I used the foam clay to fill the seam lines and then sanded them down. Then I took my drill and made a small hole in the base of the handle. This is where the Mickey head will attach. I got a small eye hook and then screwed it in. Then I got some armature wire and placed it through the hook. Now that the basic shape is done, I'm going to set this aside for painting, but before I get to painting, I need to make that Mickey head. So I bought this silicone oval mold and began filling the middle ones with the foam clay. I wish this mold had 4 in the middle, but I'll just have to make another one once these are done. Also in that set of the Christmas ornaments, I got 2 of the bigger ones that was just about the size of the template, and then filled those with foam clay. I then put the ornaments in the silicone mold into the freezer for just a couple of hours. Once I took them out of the freezer, I immediately took them out of the molds. If I allowed the foam clay to go back up to room temperature again, then it would actually be really hard to take them out of the mold. I let them dry after a day and came back and cut off the excess clay. Then I used water to piece them together. I used more foam clay to cover the seams for the head and the ears, and then used water to smooth it out. Once the ears and the head were dry, I did a light sanding. I wanted to have some sort of support, so I used a dowel. I didn't have anything else in the shop except this carbon fiber rod, but for something like this, you can use a wooden dowel or a toothpick. I then used my drill to make a small hole in the head and the ears. I placed the dowel in each of the ear and then poured some super glue into the head. I put the ears on and then grabbed the same eye screw that we used before and screwed it into the top of the head. I put the head on an armature wire and now it's ready for sealing and painting. To seal the foam, I took black Plasti Dip and sprayed 2 coats over the entire surface of the key and the Mickey head. Then I took some frog tape and wrapped the grip. I used Montana Spray Paint Silver to coat the entire key and the head. Once dried, I started taping off the sections where it was going to be blue. I covered the rest of the Keyblade with construction paper just to make sure that I didn't get overspray. Then I grabbed this metallic blue airbrush color and did multiple passes. Then for the guard, I grabbed this metallic yellow and then began spraying. Once I gave it a good amount of time to dry, I started taking off all the masking tape. Some of the silver came up from the masking tape, so I went ahead and used some of this Rub and Buff silver leaf to fill in those and cover it up. To finish this paint, I actually decided to go with a 2K clear gloss. Now this can is a lot more expensive just because of the 2-part component that's in it, but if you just have normal gloss varnish, then you can use that. But this really did give me a good finish, and it did harden the outside of the blade. Because I know that the entire can of the 2K will actually dry up in an hour, I had to use the entire can within this one project. Once everything was dried, I took off the masking tape that was on the grip. Now it seems like the main body is done. Next, I'll need to attach the Mickey head. I went to the craft store and bought some chains and a swivel hook. I used pliers to open and close the chains. I connected the swivel to the end of the chain and hooked it to the back of the Keyblade. I cut the chain down to about a foot and connected the Mickey head, and now I'm done.
I cannot believe that I have my own Keyblade. I tried to make one back when I was in high school out of wooden dowels, and it was a disaster. But I'm really happy with how this turned out, and this was the first time that I used a 2K clear gloss on one of my projects with foam. The only downside is that if it ends up getting hit, I did notice some cracking or some peeling, but I still love this finish though. So if you happen to have the extra cash to go with the 2K clear gloss, I would highly recommend it if you're looking for something more of like a centerpiece or for something on display. I actually got a request from one of my viewers and they wanted to see me make Shinobu's blade from Demon Slayer. So we're going to be jumping back into the Demon Slayer world with my next video, and once that video goes live, I'm going to go ahead and post it right here for you, so then that way you can watch it now. Also, like, comment, and subscribe. It helps out a lot.